Hi everyone, my name's Jordan Marshall and I'm the Chief Reporter and Special Projects Editor at Building Magazine. I'd love to welcome you all to today's session, which is titled How Can Your Business Best Benefit from Employee Incentive Schemes? To kick things off, I'm going to introduce today's speakers, who are both from Haynes Watts, Matthew Thorpe and Jonathan Scott. Big thank you to both of you for joining us today. We're really excited about this session. Just for our audience, the way today's session is going to run is that I'm going to hand over to the guys who are going to run us through a lot of the key areas. Do encourage you to send through your questions as they go, and we'll try and cover off as many of those as we can in the Q&A session at the end. So send those through at any time. They'll be coming through to me to moderate, and then we'll be passing those along as we go. That's probably enough from me, so I'll hand over to Matthew first, who's going to kick things off.
Thanks, Jordan. So I'm Matthew Thorpe. I'm the Managing Partner of the Haynes Watts Essex office. I'm joined today by Jonathan Scott, who is Tax Partner and Head of our Tax Incentives and Reliefs team in Newcastle. Haynes Watts is a top 15 firm of accountants, tax and business advisors. We specialise in supporting owner-managed businesses. Personally, construction and the built environment makes up more than 70% of my client portfolio. So the unique issues that the sector faces are well known to me. So the aim of today is to talk through some of the challenges and hot topics that we're seeing in the sector, paying specific attention to the workforce and its key role in the future of both individual businesses, but also the sector as a whole. I think where we are at the moment, vacancies in construction are at a 20-year high, following the wider UK job market, where there were over 1.1 million vacancies at the end of September. Obviously, coming through COVID, the pandemic, priorities changing, upwards of 25% of people currently say that they plan to change jobs in the coming months, with those working in construction and the built environment amongst the most confident of finding a new role. Obviously, we've had significant impact of Brexit, reduced number of EU workers in the workforce, increase in the amount of domestic construction projects being undertaken, which is putting resource from site. All of that is contributing to significant increases in wages for lots of trades and professionals, just as the demand rises. I think the drivers for employee satisfaction are changing. There's greater focus now on finding an organisation that fits with your principles, has fair working practices, allows flexibility, and acknowledges the importance of work-life balance being amongst the top ranked factors now when people are choosing new employment. It's no longer just about offering the most money. Now, obviously, as a sector, there have been so many challenges over the last 18 to 24 months. Increased health and safety regulations, change to working practices driven by COVID, spiralling material prices, which I'm sure we've all seen, steel, concrete, to name a few, significant delays and the subsequent pressurised catch-up periods that we've all had from closures for, positive tests, teams not being able to be on site when they should be. There's so many moving parts that make running a business in the sector challenging. But also, I think what sometimes is overlooked is the way that they feed down and add pressure throughout the workforce. It's not just the people making the decisions that are impacted. So I think, it's fair to say that at this moment in time, we're asking our workforces to take on more pressure, greater challenges, all during a time when demand for their services is at a 20-year high and the offer of more money alone isn't enough to keep them or attract new people. So, all that said, what does that actually mean for your businesses right now? What can you do about it? I think for me, certainly, there's a strong need to look at how you recruit and retain excellent people. It's always been something that's important, but never more so than now. In the current climate, that needs to be an all-encompassing plan that considers who and what you are as an organisation, who will align with you and share your values and visions, who you're looking for, what level. Will you embrace apprenticeship schemes and develop people in the company mould, or shop for ready-made high performers? What can you offer that makes you attractive and different in a competitive market? And how you know, when you have excellent people, do you really make them feel valued, committed members of the team who want to stay and grow with the business, not just get the maximum benefit they can in a short period of time while they're there? Now, my view is very much there's two strands to this issue. One is, what should we be doing right now to retain our high performers, ensure continuity, commitment from them in a competitive market? The second is the business's long-term strategy, dealing with the big, difficult feeling issues, succession, safeguarding the business's legacy and brand, whether the business could and should keep its independence. You know, so many of these issues hinge on the strength and commitment of the people in the organisation. You know, putting those people at the heart of planning really is, in most cases, the best for everybody involved. So in this context, we're increasingly talking to clients and business owners about, you know, the positive role that employee incentives can play. There's a variety of options open to employers that can deliver benefits, you know, not just for the employees that you want to retain, but the business itself and for you as, you know, as owners, as managers, as leaders in those businesses. So to begin with, I'm going to hand over to Johnny, who's going to walk you through some of the options that exist to incentivise current employees to start with.
Thanks, Matt. So I think just picking up on what obviously Matthew said, there's two strands to workforce engagement or incentive. There's obviously the short term and there's the long term. So the short term is what probably majority will be aware of, and that's sort of more akin to a benefits package and bonus. So bonus arrangements aren't new to anyone's industry. Typically they have been expensive. NI and PAYE, employers NI on that bonus payment as well. Now, with the increase in the corporation tax relief going up to 25%, it does have a net effect for the business that bonus payment is going to be less costly. However, everyone needs to be aware that there is also the social levy that will attach to that bonus payment as well. So it's all in, employer and employee, it's a 2.5% increase in the tax take. One planning point a lot of our clients look at is offering the ability to convert that bonus payment into a pension contribution. So obviously, if we are to about a £10,000 bonus, for example, and we just say we'll convert that instead into a lump sum pension contribution, then there's no PAYE and NI for the employee to suffer on that, and also for the business, you're going to save the 13.8% for the employer's NI, of which you can sometimes go half as with the employee to increase that contribution. So it's a bit of a win-win for the employee. So it goes in their saving pot. There's no income tax or PAYE, so the full gross going in, and they might get a bit of an increase with sharing in the employer's NI. Just rounding off the short-term planning point, because certainly long-term strategy is key, but you still need to look after the employees within that period of time too. And having a complex bonus and benefit structure can certainly increase productivity. Now, in terms of benefits, there's a vast array of different benefits people are having. Obviously, hybrid working is something that is sort of sweeping the world, not just the UK. But certainly in the past, company cars have been utilised very well, I suppose, by businesses. But certainly with the push towards the net zero carbon, getting away from petrol and diesel, I suppose people just need to be aware that hybrids also aren't as favourable. So if we are looking at trying to provide extra benefits over some competitors, then electric cars can be quite tax beneficial, I suppose, for the employee, but also for the company, because we can get quite a large number of corporation tax reliefs for going into the electric car market. So short term, we can obviously, it's monetary, it's looking at what that benefits package is for the individual, but quite key is what is the long-term strategy of that business. How do we incentivize that key management or those key employees to all pull in the same direction and sort of be turned away or turned off by competitors or recruitment agents trying to trying to steal that talent. So there's a number of different types of share incentives. We are going to go through them all today because there are so many. What we're going to concentrate on is 2 or 3 of them, whereby they are heavily utilised within your marketplace. Sort of talk about the characteristics of those share schemes, but also the benefits and the drawbacks as well. Because quite clearly, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we can have different multiple share schemes within a business. It's not just you're going down this route, you can't do anything else. So the first one is alphabet shares. It's something that I have seen utilised within the industry quite routinely. It's not something I would actively say is the biggest pull for people to stay in a business. An alphabet share is a share where it might be A, B, C, and D, and different share classes have different rights. And what I've seen primarily used for management teams is a different class of shares that just have rights to dividends effectively. So within that benefit, effectively the management team would get their salary paid out in dividends as opposed to a bonus or PAYE. It saves on the income tax for those individuals. However, it comes with its risks from HMRC. HMRC can challenge that validity of the share class, and if that is the case, we could start crystallising some tax charges for the individuals. So we need to be very careful in terms of what we're looking at in terms of alphabet shares. What is the plan? Why are we doing it? What is the main goal? It's tax avoidance, then everyone needs to be very careful in terms of what they're putting in place. But I have seen it used, extensively, and it does come with its health warning. But they are available, they can be put in place, but it's still not going to get you that long-term strategy. It is a benefit for that employee or that management team now, because they're obviously seeing a benefit in terms of their take-home pay, but it's not going to get them any investment in terms of the equity or the long-term strategy of that business. So that's sort of alphabet shares. That's sort of, again, just a quick overview, because they aren't what I would say is the go-to share incentive for key employees. Next one down is the unapproved scheme, so the CSOP, effectively as it's known. So an unapproved scheme is whereby we would provide share options, grant some options to an employee or a group of employees, so a management team. The unapproved element is just that it hasn't been agreed with HMRC. It's not one of their approved share schemes that they are happy that companies put in place, which have better tax advantages, but with those advantages, which we'll go through, there's stipulations in terms of the amount that you can provide to an employee, and also the size of the company that can put them in place. So the unapproved scheme isn't to say that it's not allowed, it's just that it's not a HMRC backed or approved scheme. So the unapproved schemes that we see businesses put in, whereby you might have an employee that's helped grow the business, and you want to give options to that employee of which they can exercise in the future. Now, with an unapproved scheme, effectively, we are agreeing what that exercise price is, and that in the future, when they exercise that option, then there's a difference between what we agree in a price and what that option is valued when they exercise that. So that would be the market value as opposed to the grant value. Now, with an unapproved scheme, that can be extremely costly for the individual. If we had a price agreed of £10, and when the employee comes to exercise that price, it is £100 because we've helped grow the business has gone from strength to strength. The difference in that value from £10 to £100 is going to be subject to income tax, which, if we aren't selling the business at that point in time, or the employee isn't able to sell their shares at that time, it's not a readily convertible asset, then they're going to have an immediate income tax charge of which they've had no benefit. There's been no cash inflow for that employee. It's how are they going to fund that income tax charge? And sometimes a lot of what I've seen or been brought in to advise on these, that hasn't been factored in. And then what we can't do is retrospectively go back and put in an approved scheme. So that individual can feel pretty hard done by, to be fair. Yes, they've been given the option, but they've got this big income tax charge, which how are they going to fund that? Subsequent to that, obviously they've exercised the share option. They've now got, in that example, £100 share. If the company continues to grow after they've exercised their right, then they can sell that, and it's subject to capital gains tax, which would be at 20%, because they don't, depending on the size of the share scheme or the value that they've got, they won't be able to access the entrepreneurs relief, which some of the approved schemes will give them access to. So 20%. So they've been taxed on the gain in income tax. So from what they were given, so what they could have exercised that at £10, they've been taxed on the difference to £100, which is £90. And then say we then went and sold it at £150, then they're going to be taxed on the capital gains as well. So a large amount of tax leakage in that sort of scheme, but the schemes are pretty flexible. We can put in anything we want. The people that we give the unapproved scheme share options to don't have to be employees. So it could be non-executives if we want to bring them into the fold if they are helping drive the business. But certainly with that flexibility comes the disadvantage of non-beneficial tax advantages for both the employee and the business. So they are used, they aren't used as much because of the impact it does have on the employee, but they are flexible. You don't have to get a valuation with HMRC, which again opens itself up to a risk. If we in that example said, well, actually worth 100, HMRC are well within their rights to actually come along and value, and they say actually no, it's 200. So the actual tax at that point would be the difference between 10 and 200, and the employee would have to pay that. Moving on from that, obviously that's the unapproved scheme. What a large number of the industry uses, what's classified as an AMI, an Enterprise Management Incentive. Now that is an approved scheme, and that is utilised extremely well. That gives a tax advantageous benefits to the employee, whereby we can agree a valuation with HMRC up front, and that there is no income tax charge on the gain that they have from that point in time. So if in that example we agreed a valuation of £10 and they exercised in the future, there is no income tax charge on that. So it's a massive win for employees. And granted that they pay the £10 as well when they exercise, they don't have to. So again, in that example, if our key management team we've provided this employee incentive scheme to, said, well, we're going to let you away with paying the £10, then effectively they'd have income tax on the £10. So again, you could even go as far to say, well, you've helped us so much to grow, we're actually not going to ask you to pay for that. So you just have to find the tax on the £10, which would be about half, and you're gonna basically have all the growth in value from what that price is, the £10, all the way up to, as I said in the last example, say £150 a share, and of which they would be taxed. The capital gains tax of £10, 10%. Entrepreneurs is straight away on an AMI. Why people use AMIs with management teams or wider teams is that you can put certain hurdles involved in a share scheme, such as an AMI. It can be based on revenue targets, profit targets, length of service, or it can just it can be geared towards a sale. Tech companies mainly do it towards a sale. Construction, architecture, built environment tend to be more on an EBITDA, or sometimes an exit as well, an exit value. So building in those hurdles then ensures that whoever is in the scheme is pulling in the same direction. So where you have a core management team and you do want to go for growth, or you do want to go for profitability, you can put those hurdles in place. Now, when recruitment agents are coming in and saying, well, we might be able to get you an extra 10,000 or 15,000 going somewhere else, yes, we can obviously look at the remuneration package of that management team, but are they going to be offered the benefit of actually being an equity holder of the company should you reach these hurdles? And that, what we've seen in practice, that really drives engagement with the team, the workforce, just to pull in the same direction, because everyone's got the same ultimate goal. Everyone's going to share in that goal at whatever point in time we're expecting to exercise those options. And that is a powerful tool to to incentivize those individuals whereby they might not have that elsewhere, especially going in cold into a business. You might find that it's only typically talent that's been around, helped the owners for a period of time that has some loyalty that might be eligible for these schemes, or what we've used them for. Again, if it's my client trying to get talent to come into the business, we've used them as a negotiation tool. Yes, the salary might be the same as what they're on in the current role. However, you actually can go into the share option that allows you the potential to be an equity shareholder of that business at some point in time. But again, as I said, AMIs come with restrictions, and you can't get yourself into an AMI scheme if you've got more than 250 employees. There's a maximum amount of equity that an employee can actually hold under the AMI, but that's only a grant, and you can't give AMIs more than 30%, which typically we don't find. Typically an AMI scheme is built up of a number of individuals, and it's as a collective they normally hold a certain value of the business, of which they don't have that value until they exercise or they meet those destination hurdles. So quite clearly, if things aren't working, the business isn't working, the hurdles aren't met, they can't exercise those options, so the options just lapse. So therefore, as owners, you still have the full control of the business at that point in time. So very, very heavily utilised, very heavily regulated by HMRC. However, the tax benefits for the individual and the businesses are far outstrip the unapproved scheme, but as long as we can adhere to those requirements in terms of eligibility of business, eligibility of the employee, because they have to be an employee of the business to qualify for an AMI, as opposed to the unapproved where it could be anyone. It allows us to drive that company, that business, your business forward with everyone sort of being on board. So both of those schemes, the unapproved and the AMI, they have a valuation. So we have to agree valuation under the AMI with HMRC to get that line in the sand in terms of what is this value. The unapproved is sort of open to interpretation and argument from HMRC. So basically we're sort of agreeing that there is a risk. So we say it's £100, HMRC says it's 200 and might end up in the middle. But all the while that employee is subject to the income tax on that difference. If we don't want to have that valuation and we don't want to give away any of the equity that's been built up to this point in time by the current owners, the current team, what we can look to do is put growth shares in place. So growth shares are a different class of share. Again, going back to what I said about alphabet shares, this class of share would be after a line in the sand. So we value the business as at today, and that valuation will be locked in for the current owners. And then the new growth shares will take a pound value from tomorrow and will only share in value over and above that hurdle that we've agreed. So they are very attractive for individuals because there's no income tax, no capital gains tax at that point in time. Effectively, it's a value of £1 because it's hope value. If the business doesn't grow, it doesn't achieve what it's hoping to achieve, it doesn't move from the valuation as at what we've agreed as that line in the sand, then there is no value attached to those shares. So the employees that have those shares given to them because they have those in their hand on day one, as opposed to the others, which is an option and they only get that at exercise date, then there is no value, and effectively if the employee were to leave, then they would hand those shares back. So growth shares can take many forms. You can have layered growth shares. So if you have certain individuals that come into the business at different times, then you might need to have A shares for the original shareholders, B shares for the management team that got the first tranche of growth shares. There's obviously been a significant amount of growth in that in this example. Therefore, there's another management team that's come in place, so there's been new people join. Now, you wouldn't want to give them shares from the A's or the B's because that would trigger some tax charges that would be classified as an unapproved scheme. But if we give them some C shares, for example, which are growth shares from another point in time, where we are 5 years later after the first growth shares, for example, then there's still no income tax charge or CGT charge for those new employees or those new people coming into the growth share scheme. It's just that they have a higher hurdle because the business is worth more 5 years down the line when they're actually eligible to come into the growth shares than when it was when the first management team went into the growth share valuation. So we can have these layered growth shares with all the share planning. A large number of questions come through from owners and directors that what happens if they leave? What happens if we don't achieve what we want to achieve? What happens if we fall out? In majority, if not all cases, articles are changed, structures are put in place whereby you have good leaver, bad leaver provisions. If something does happen, then those share options lapse, or the shares are given back, or there's a price paid for if it was a growth share and the growth has happened. There is a value in those growth shares, so there's a mechanism to buy those back by the business at that point in time. But certainly, there is always planning for a fallout in these situations, because no one knows what is going to happen in the future. So therefore, we need to plan. But certainly, if things don't work out, either the share options lapse and the individual won't exercise the option, or they just fall away. If it's a growth share, then obviously we have to have a look at what that valuation is, and either they buy it back or the employee has to give up the rights to that growth share. So there is some things to think about. There is, I would say, there is other share options available, save as you earn and seesaw route, but certainly I wasn't going to cover this in terms of the full hour, because there's quite a bit to get through on some other things later on in the presentation. But certainly Alphabet's unapproved share scheme, AMI and growth shares are the main the main 3 or 4 share options that we see in the marketplace. They aren't cheap to put in, I would say that, and everyone needs to be aware these things aren't cheap to put in. You have to get legal documents drawn up, might have to change the articles of association for the business, shareholders' agreements need to be looked at, advice needs to be given to the employees as well. So especially if you're going for an AMI, employees need to know what they are going into, what are they signing up for, what's the consequences for them. So that all needs to be factored in time frame as well. You have to agree these things with HMRC. So in terms of time frame to put in an AMI, for example, you're not looking at weeks, you're looking at months. You need to get HMRC's buy-in. You need to put the correct steps in place to get the legal advice for both the company and the employees. And then you need to get the scheme approved post completion with HMRC. You have 91 days to do that. So it's factoring this into the long-term plan, but it's also factoring into cash flow for the business as well, showing those individuals how much the company values them. The company's is willing to put this share pot aside for everyone to share in the success of the business, but also the company's willing to invest in the professional fees to get this scheme up and running, which is when team members are comparing offers potentially, the recruitment agents providing them with offers, or recruitment agents trying to get them to move, having that share option granted at that point in time, they've got that granted. Are they going to give that up to go elsewhere, and all what they've tried to achieve or what they have been achieving will go to waste, because effectively they will lapse, so they'll have to give that share option back. So it's a powerful tool. The hurdles can be put in place, so the key objectives can be put in place, and by doing so you ensure that everyone is looking at the same objective and pulling in the same direction. So those are some examples. There is a lot of legislation, a lot of tax talk to go through in terms of each one, but that's sort of an overview in terms of how they would work, how you can put them in place. One size isn't fit all, so you could have different share options for different people and different schemes for different people. So you can choose what you want to aim, but everyone needs to be, I suppose, aware that the more schemes you put in place, the more different directions people might be going in. So it's just to bear that in mind. So I'll just pass it back to Matt as well, and then we can go over a few other things after his next discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. It's really interesting. I think it's, one of the biggest responses that I get from clients when we're discussing how you incentivize people and how you drive forward is, yeah, but I've got a very unique set of problems. Now, exactly what John's talking through there is the reason there are so many different ways that we can approach this is because there's so much flexibility in all of these schemes. The idea is that we're tailoring them to fix those problems, not trying to shoehorn in a scheme that you think might not work because you've got a set of issues. And problems that you see in a wide range of businesses, particularly in construction built environment, how do you get teams pulling together? How do you get your estimating team not blaming your commercial team when a project doesn't deliver what they thought it was going to? How do you get an operational delivery team not to pull in a different direction on a project because they're solely focused on building it in a certain way and they've not got an eye on the commercials? How do you get those teams pulling all in one direction? And absolutely evidence bears out in my experience that having incentives that get people all on the same page and working for the same end personally as well as the business is a great way to do that. So I think really, really great points. Well made there, John. Thank you. So, just to move the conversation on a step, I said earlier that in my view, there is a separate issue to consider around the long-term future of a business, its legacy, and the role its people play in achieving longevity for that business. Now, from all angles, I think the impact of an organisation's people on its future prospects are growing significantly. When a business is looking to realise value for shareholders, the traditional route would be to sell the company. But any prudent buyer today will take a close look at the quality and commitment of the workforce, often making retention of key people a major condition of purchase. Now, lots of alternatives to those business exits can include management buyouts. There's remuneration strategies that will retain top people. Many other options, some of which John's already touched on. But all of those things, in order to achieve a business being able to sustain, keep going and keep performing well, rely heavily on it having good people doing their jobs well to make the business viable in the long term and allow shareholders to realise value. Now, with that fact in mind, one of the biggest growth areas for shareholders looking to realise value whilst protecting business legacy, their brand, independence, are employee ownership trusts. Now, I'm sure many of you will have come across this concept, and it is a structure that I've seen work with fantastic results in the right circumstances. So I'm now going to hand back to Johnny just to discuss in some more detail the options that exist for shareholders trying to extract value and give you an oversight of a few different options, but particularly employee ownership trusts, their pros and cons, and how they can fit into your longer term strategy. So John, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll just give you a quick overview in terms of what is available. So obviously to realise shareholder value, you can obviously have a trade sale, management buyout, trade and asset deal. Picking up on obviously the incentives and the share incentives we might have put in place if we went for a trade sale, for example. If we put the AMIs in place, or the unapproved schemes or the growth shares, obviously whoever's owning those options or those shares at that point in time will obviously get a slice of whatever value has been agreed and whatever proportion has been agreed at the time of those share schemes being put in place. So trade sales tend to provide the biggest value, I suppose, to the shareholders, depending on who it's been sold to. Take a step back, trade and asset deals. You're selling assets from one business to another, of which can cause charges to corporation tax within the business. Therefore, it isn't as well used for realising shareholder value, but obviously for the buyer, it protects them from anything that might have happened in the business, because they aren't buying the shares. So we need to just factor that into terms of the long-term strategy of the shareholders and what value you're actually trying to extract from that business. Management buyouts can happen, and again, this can be part of incentives for employees. If we've got a key management team and we don't want to go down the share scheme route, what we can do is we can put a management buyout team together. They can buy some of the equity from the existing shareholders at an agreed value, at which point it doesn't have to be 100%, doesn't have to be control, it can just be any percentage what the existing shareholders are happy to give away or sell effectively, and that management team would have a separate vehicle, so to speak, which they would all be part of. They'd probably get some personal funding or some debt funding involved, which would buy some of the existing shares from the shareholders in an agreed value. Obviously, the company is then geared because that loan or that value has to be subsidised. So we need to factor that in terms of the company's overall position. But as Matt said, those are all standard ways. They've been around for a long time. Nothing sort of new, nothing surprising in terms of those areas. But certainly, employee ownership trusts are coming through. They're sort of blazing the trail for certainly architectural businesses are using them heavily. Not as much construction businesses at the moment, but I can see that trend changing once there's more awareness of how it actually works, what are the actual tax benefits, and what does it mean for the workforce effectively. So an employee ownership trust is a trust that is for the benefit of the employees, for every employee within that business. That is what it's for. The biggest example is the John Lewis model, I suppose. Everyone might know how John Lewis is structured, but effectively the business would be owned by a trust, an EOT is what the short name is, and that is for the benefit of everyone within the business. What happens for the existing shareholders? What happens to the shareholders who set up the business, or those that had AMI options as well, or improved options? Well, what happens is we value the business, and that business is then sold or bought by the EOT. So the Employee Ownership Trust buys those assets, those shares off the existing shareholders. What then happens is you would be exempt or subject to tax charge on the sale, but it's a 0% tax. Therefore, any gain made from the sale is effectively tax-free in essence. Therefore, that is a massive incentive for the existing shareholders to go down the EOT route. It then allows them to exit the business, or also they can jump back in as the board. So you still have a board of directors and you have a board of trustees. Because obviously the trust needs to be for the benefit of all, and therefore you need to have independent, or we strongly recommend you have independent trustees, as well as trustees made up of the directors of the business and also some of the workforce on that board of trustees, just to get a feel for what is actually happening on the ground. So in that situation, you have your business or your group of businesses. It's then owned by the trust, and then the trust owe the money out to the existing shareholders, or the exited shareholders, as I would say, because quite clearly, whatever the value of that business is, it's probably not just sitting in cash. Therefore, there's a value. The trust has to pay that value out to the holder or the exiting shareholders, and that'll then be just sat on a loan. It's a loan to the exiting shareholders, of which will be funded by either debt, so the business can go and get debt, or can be funded over a period of time which the business can sort of sustain. Now, what is the benefit for the employees to be part of an employee ownership trust owned business? Well, for those individuals within the business, those employees, they can receive a free £3,600 bonus per annum, tax-free, of which can be declared by the trust. Now, that bonus has to be for everyone. We can't pick and choose who has those bonuses. We can still pay standard bonuses. We can still have different remuneration strategies for everyone in the business at different levels. But this one-off per annum bonus, which we can declare, is tax-free, which is brilliant. You know, it's a tax-free bonus, and depending on what level the employees are at, it can either be almost double what they would have received in a bonus at that if they were a higher rate taxpayer. So we can pay that out as opposed to an employee ownership trust. Once the existing loan or the value has been paid out to the older shareholders, then there's a sense of belonging in terms of an employee ownership trust. There isn't a large proportion of the profit going out to existing shareholders. It's staying within the business. It's for the benefit of the employees within that business. Therefore, it can be reinvested into better commercial space, better benefits, larger or different salary packages. But again, that's decided upon by the directors and by the trustees. Therefore, if the management team, for example, aren't ready to retire, they do sell to the employee ownership trust, they will still be there and still be earning their same remuneration package as previous, as long as it's sort of agreed with the trustees that it is commercially viable and benchmark against the rest of the industry. But it's certainly a key selling point, I suppose, for attracting new talent. I've seen it used heavily. People are using it as a bit of PR as well at the moment, if I'm honest, whereby they're an employee-owned trust and business, and it's, you know, profits are made and reinvested in the business, reinvested in the talent, reinvested in the training, the facilities, because they haven't got what is perceived to be shareholders taking majority of the profit out of the business, and it's all to be reinvested. So certainly that can work in terms of looking at that as a strategy going forward. But I would say that it's not a strategy to be taken lightly, because once you're in to an employee ownership trust, it's very hard to get yourself back out of it. So the employee ownership trust has to own control, which is 51% of the shares. Now, you could have 51% bought from one person, or you can have it bought by multiple of the shareholders, but certainly the trust is then in control. So everyone needs to be aware of that. And once you crystallize that value, if the company doubled or tripled in the future because of the benefit of having the employee ownership trust in place, then you are, as the exit shareholders, you're going to see that value going into the trust, but it's not going to, you've sort of cashed in your chips early on that. So it's just to be careful, and unraveling these things are extremely difficult. So not to be taken lightly, but certainly a big push in the marketplace of all marketplaces actually to look at, is there something right? Should we be considering these? And if not, certainly looking at putting in a share plan for that key management team is certainly worth looking at, because we can demonstrate the benefits, the growth of businesses, the profitability of businesses that put these share schemes in place for the individuals, because there's just a more sustained focus by those that are involved. So I think that's everything in terms of high level. Again, in terms of share planning, I would say the worst thing to do is just to give shares to someone or a team of people, because that can crystallize some really nasty tax charges. Getting tax advice at the outset, speaking to those involved that you want to provide these incentives to, and then finding out which route might be the best. It might be an AMI, it might be an unapproved scheme for whatever reason, or it might be growth shares, or it might be a combination of a few factors. It's certainly worth having a look at what's out there, and then deep diving into what are the implications for individuals, and what are the certain implications for certain businesses. Because again, as I said, one size doesn't fit all in terms of these. I think that's sort of everything from me in terms of the tax front. Apologies, it is quite tax heavy. But
no, thank you. I think it's a really, really good overview, and I think that gives people a lot of insightful information. I'm just going to jump in with a question quickly, if that's okay with both of you. But one of the things that sort of sprang to mind there is there's a lot of different ways to incentivize employees that you've sort of run through there. How do you go about deciding what to give who? Is there, how do you decide what to give away to employees in bonuses, shares, incentives, and how do you decide which one is the best approach? And I know you said it's not a one size fits all sort of thing, but are there certain key questions that you can ask yourself or your team to try and determine that?
Yeah, I think certainly in my experience, it's, as you rightly say, there's certainly not a one size fits all answer. I think what has to be considered is what you have to start with what you're looking to achieve from that person. Is it just about getting them the maximum value at the lowest possible tax charge that you can in order to keep them in the business? Is it incentivizing them to pull the business in a particular direction? All of those things will dictate the type of instrument that you want to use. And then there is obviously a lot of commercial considerations around the values that you're willing to give away. You have to consider where control will sit in the organisation after you've granted some of these options or implemented some of this tax planning. It's a big consideration. What can the company actually afford? As John says, there's a big investment in professional fees to deliver some of this structuring, and ultimately, you are one of the most damaging things that you can do, I think, is to put in place a scheme that sets people's expectations at a high level, that they're expecting this fantastic bonus package or they're expecting to get significant dividends, and actually the company's performance isn't going to allow those to be paid. That can be really disincentivizing. So making sure that it ties in with the company's expected performance and trajectory, I think, is a really important consideration when you're setting these out.
Johnny, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I think as Matt said, it's having those conversations. As for those business owners that are listening, you know who the talent is, you know who you need to keep a hold of. Those are the ones to sort of get in a room, sit down and explain to them, or have your advisor in with you and say, these are the options, guys. This is what it means for you, what it means for the business. Which one or which ones do we think is actually going to incentivize you the most? Because we like to think we know what makes everyone tick, but until you start having these conversations, and you sometimes do have these conversations, I suppose I will say this, you start having these conversations with share options, and sometimes people do run for the hills. They really are not interested in these plans, which is totally understandable, and that's fine. But at least then you know that you aren't planning on those for your exit. So it does give you a bit of an insight in terms of who and what makeup is within your management team. So definitely having these conversations early allows you to plan for your eventual potential exit or retirement.
Brilliant. And on that point, on the exit plan, and particularly topical given succession and exit planning today, given that Laing O'Rourke's finally announced what their exit and succession plan is for Ray O'Rourke. So I think it's a particularly topical one for us to be discussing today. But at what stage should someone start thinking about succession and exit planning?
As early as possible, I think, is the very simple answer to that. I think there's nothing more frustrating either side of the table than a client saying to you, oh, I've thought about it, and actually I'd like to be out by April. And obviously you don't have the time to work it. It limits your options. And I think it's one of those things that often it's really scary. It's scary for all of us to think about. When we talk to business owners, this is their life's work. Often they have invested a huge chunk of their life, blood, sweat, tears into growing this business. So firstly, the idea that somebody else is going to come in and take it over full stop is scary. And when you actually ask people to put a time bar on that and think about when that might happen, that can be terrifying. Now, we recognise that. I think a lot of people think, well, the second I start a conversation with my advisors, that's it. I've pulled the trigger and I'm committed. It isn't that. We understand that process. We understand the fear, the hurdles that you have to overcome to get there. So the earlier that you start that conversation, that doesn't mean that you're heading down the track that you can't, come back down and explore others. It's just that the earlier that you do it, the more options that are open to you. It really is as simple as that.
Yeah. I suppose just to give an example in terms of the built environment, it is left to closer to the end. Whereas if you think of a tech business, the tech business starts up knowing what their exit strategy is. So it's totally different. And like I said, that's not the right way, and certainly leaving it to the end isn't the wrong way. But having the conversation throughout the full business life cycle allows you to bring new talent in, develop the talent, because quite clearly you've spent your full life developing the business. To hand over the reins, some people aren't ready for that, and they do need a bit of training, they need a bit of nurturing. So having that earlier conversation allows them a longer period of time to get to where they need to be.
On that point, in terms of bringing the right people in and bringing the new talent in to support these sort of transition and succession and exit planning, how important is having the right incentives, and how important is it having all of these things working together to make sure that the business is operating properly, moving towards these key milestones, if that makes sense? Sorry, that was a bit tangential and rambling.
No, I mean, I think from my perspective, it really is critical. It's, I think it was a point John made at the end of his presentation. You do have to be careful. If you implement too many different variations of these schemes, you can end up with different teams, different levels of management pulling in slightly different directions because their personal goals don't align. So, and again, it comes back to the point of starting the conversation earlier, starting to consider your options earlier. Then you can knit these things together. Most of these schemes, these options will dovetail really, really nicely. If they're put in place at the right time, there's a clear roadmap of what we're going to try to achieve when. They fit together fantastically. The idea of being able to, as an example, put in place a tax incentive EMI scheme, giving people some, equity ownership or potential equity ownership in a business, and being able to talk to them at the time that you're putting that in place about, well, actually, the value in those options usually is where the final business exit comes and how you're going to recognise a big chunk of money for those options that you've been granted. If you can tie that in with a conversation about where you expect the ultimate exit from that business to be and what that's going to mean for them, actually, we foresee giving you these share options, growing the business to X, Y, Z size, and then that's going to tie in really nicely with the existing shareholders' exit plans, and we're going to be looking at an employee ownership trust because we want you to continue the legacy. I mean, that's a great story. That really is ownership, recognising as an employee, feeling recognised, feeling part of the future of that business, and not only that, not feeling like it's an unattainable carrot being dangled. You've got clarity of what the options are to realise the value from those options. So I think having them all working together is crucial.
Yeah, I mean,
John,
we are, every sector, ours included, it is a skill shortage. It's not going to go away anytime soon. Certainly not in the next year or two, or even 5. It's going to be a long drawn out process to get good talent back into the marketplace. The worst thing to do is lose the talent that you've got. So having these working to the best of their ability. Obviously, there's still other factors in terms of people's decision-making process, but having these things sitting in the background is a massive pull for people to either stay and continue and develop, or attract new talent into the business to say this is open for those people that want to come in and succeed, and this is the blueprint we've got, this is where we're going, as Matt said, and this is what we're looking to achieve. And having that discussion with someone over the table and then looking at their options is a massive tick in whoever's box that is putting that in front of them.
Brill, some more great advice there. I think we just had a question come in from the audience asking about the viability of putting share option schemes in place for different size businesses. Given the initial cost, is it as viable for like a small business as a large business to put those sorts of schemes in place?
It most certainly is. What you typically find though in a smaller business, you might have less hurdles, you might have less trigger points as opposed to a large business, because the large business has got a large amount of value that's built up. Therefore, the valuation agreements with HMRC, the legal work is a lot more complex. Therefore, you typically find that for a larger business, the fees are obviously quite considerably a lot bigger than a smaller business, where you might have one employee doing an EMI or 2 people doing an EMI. So it's definitely not one size fits all in terms of fees. So the best advice I would say is don't be scared to have that conversation, because until you do, you don't know what the costs are going to be. But certainly there's no barrier to entry for any size business. We have startups that put AMIs in from the get-go. So quite clearly, the sooner you do an AMI or an unapproved or a growth share, actually it can become a lot cheaper because there's not as much value there. There's not as much tax risk for obviously the advisors to factor in.
Yeah, I think there's also the point of, because I totally agree, it's not one size fits all in terms of fee. It's possible for businesses of all size. Actually, there's often the argument that in a smaller business with fewer people, the relative importance of one or two individuals can be massive. You know, they are effectively departments in their own right. So often in a smaller business, making sure those key people are tied in actually is even more important than in a larger business, because you don't have the support network people to, you know, to swallow up their duties if they do decide to look elsewhere.
Well, I think we've probably got time to cover off one last question. So one of the other ones is, what are the biggest challenges when trying to sell a construction company? Yeah, I'll hand over to you guys because you're gonna know better than me.
There's a lot of them, and we've probably only got 4 minutes. I think the biggest barrier when you try to sell a construction business to a trade sale is the makeup of them. Very, very often, small, medium construction and, you know, related architecture practices, they hinge on some key individuals. Those key individuals tend to be the value drivers in those businesses. So there is always a fear, I think, of somebody coming in, investing their money to buy a business that looks great on paper, that the second that they've bought out that shareholder, who may be the driving force behind it, that value is going to drop away. So I think that fear factor is a big one. The nature of the business itself, you know, there's inherent risk in construction projects. There's inherent risks in picking up an architecture project that's got, sorry, an architecture practice that's got legacy projects behind it that might have exposure to PI claims. There's all of these risks that sit around it, and what they will do effectively is just drive people's confidence in paying a premium for that business down. So I think fear of legacy issues coming back to bite them, and fear of not being able to sustain that business in a new format generally are the fears. Now, obviously, there's lots that you can do. There are lots of businesses that have secure pipelines, businesses that work off of you know, frameworks, and they might have 5 years of continuous work secured. All of those things will help. There's lots of, I think, things that you can do. John mentioned earlier the hand-holding of a business owner that's looking to exit, or however they're looking to exit. That work of delegating, getting the right support network around them, all of those things in the lead up to an exit are vital, really, really important things to do. So there's lots that you can do to help make the process easier, but I think they're the two main barriers for me when you're looking to sell.
Yeah. The only main point from me on that is getting the house in order, making sure that, you know, if it's a group, is the group right? Does the group of companies fit together, or do we need to get rid of some of the companies, just emerge them out of the group so that what we're selling is exactly what they're actually wanting to buy? Making sure all the, you know, the due diligence would be, you know, watertight as well. So there's plenty to do, but also getting the management team in place with some share options that you can sit in front of the buyer and say, this is the team for you. I'm basically, so they are going to be there to take the thing forward.
Brilliant. Well, I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the hour, which has actually gone by really quickly. So I'd love to thank you both for all your contribution and your expertise. I think it's been a really valuable session for everyone who's tuned in today. I know I've certainly personally learned a lot of stuff that I did not know before, so I really appreciate that. I'd also just love to thank Haynes Watts for making today's session possible at all. Wouldn't have been able to do it without partnership with them. Just like to flag, we've still got a couple more webinars before the end of the year. You can find all the details for those on our websites, Building Design, and Housing Today. So that's it from me for today. So thank you to our panelists, thank you to our audience, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks guys.